Welcome to the Rabbi's Message. This week's Torah portion is Parshat Miketz from the book of Genesis. Getting close to the end of the book, but still not there. In this week's Torah portion, the oversight of the Torah portion talks about how Pharaoh is now the king of Egypt, and the vice versa to Pharaoh becomes Joseph. After the two dreams that are interpreted of Pharaoh by this individual named as Joseph, and it talks about how in the land of Israel, Jacob, there's a terrible famine, and Jacob turns to his sons and says, go down to Egypt, where I hear that there is food, and gather food and buy food that we should be able to survive here up in Israel. And there's, of course, a tremendous dialogue between the children of Jacob and their lost brother, known as Joseph. And there are hundreds of commentaries that discuss the story of the relationship between Joseph and his brothers, the sons of Jacob. What I want to focus on is towards the beginning of this week's Torah portion. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, has two dreams. This is what we learn. In the first dream, Pharaoh sees himself standing over the Nile River, and behold, as it says, there came up under the river 7 cows, handsome and fat of flesh, and they fed the reeds grass. And behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and lean of flesh, and stood by the other cows upon the bank of the river. And the ugly and lean cows ate up the 7 handsome and fat cows. This is the story that Pharaoh has in his dream. In the second dream, Pharaoh sees 7 thin, shriveled urns of grain, swallows 7 fat urns of grain. Now, what's interesting is that each one of these ears of grain that they swallow, none of the wise men in Egypt can offer Pharaoh a satisfactory interpretation of this dream. Then the young slave was Joseph. He's summoned from the dungeon to the palace at that period of time. Joseph interprets the dream to mean that the 7 years of plenty symbolized by the fat cows and the fat grain will be followed by 7 years of hunger reflected by the lean cows and the shriveled ears. The 7 years of famine will be so powerful that they will swallow up, so to speak, and you will totally forget any trace of the years of plenty. This is Joseph's interpretation. Joseph then advises Pharaoh how to deal with the situation. And he gives him wonderful advice. He says like this. The verse says, now Pharaoh must seek out a man with insight and wisdom and place him in a charge of Egypt. A rotating system will have to be set up over Egypt during the 7 years of surplus, Joseph goes on to explain, in which grain will be stored for the upcoming years of famine. Brilliant advice. Pharaoh is blown away by Joseph's vision, and as it says in the verse, can there be another person who has God's spirit in him, as this man does? Pharaoh asks his advisors, there is none as outstanding as wise as you, he says to Joseph. You shall be over my house, as the verse says, and according to your word shall all my people be ruled. Only the throne will I overtake you, meaning that you will be totally second in command. Joseph is then appointed as the viceroy of Egypt, and as the viceroy of Egypt, he is the big man in the house. And the rest, of course, is history. That's the famous story that we have, how Joseph comes to power under the leadership of King Pharaoh. There's 3 questions, and this is the 3 questions I want to focus on. You know, in biblical commentators, they struggle with 3 major questions concerning this remarkable story. One of them is as follows. It is difficult to understand how, following his interpretation of the dreams, Joseph proceeded to give Pharaoh advice on how to deal with the impending famine. How is a freshly liberated slave not scared of offering the king of Egypt, who was then the monarch who ruled the superpower? Pharaoh was the most powerful king. He gave it unsolicited advice. Pharaoh summoned Joseph from the dungeon to interpret his dreams, not to become an advisor to the king. So where was it that Joseph sort of got this chutzpah, that all of a sudden he said, you know what, I'm going to tell you actually how to interpret these dreams? That's one question that we need to understand. Question number 2. It is obvious from the narrative that Pharaoh was actually thunderstruck by Joseph's solution to the problem. But one needs not to be a rocket scientist when you suggest this, to have 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine, that obviously that you should store food during the plenty time. So in order, when there's going to be a hunger, you will have enough food. Why does the verse say that Joseph was a genius advice? What a wise man. Is there any other wise man in the entire kingdom? And the third question that needs to be understood. Pharaoh also was amazed by Joseph's interpretation of the dream themselves, which none of his own wise men could conceive. But Joseph's interpretation seems simple and obvious. When are cows fat? When there is a lot of food. When are they lean? When there is no food. When is grain fat? When there's plentiful of harvest. When is grain lean? Obviously during times of famine. So why was Pharaoh so astonished by Joseph's random interpretation of the dream? And why could he not see anything else or anyone else that was able to interpret the same interpretation? To me, it seems very obvious and very, very sensible. So these are 3 questions that demand an understanding. You know, the dream of Pharaoh in Egypt was once explained in 1973. It was addressed by the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory. And he explained it as follows. The dream experts of Egypt did indeed conceive of Joseph's interpretation to Pharaoh's dream. In other words, the 7 years of hunger would follow 7 years of plenty. Yet they dismissed this interpretation from their mind because it is not an account for one important detail of the dream. When you think about it and you go back to the words of the dream, in Pharaoh's first dream, he saw how the 7 ugly and lean cows that came up after the 7 handsome cows stood near the other fat cows upon the bank of the river. In other words, there was a moment during which both sets of cows coexisted simultaneously, and only afterwards did the lean cows proceed to swallow up the fat cows. It was this detail of the dream that caused the wise men of Egypt to reject the interpretation that Joseph would later offer to Pharaoh and compelled them to present all types of far-fetched explanations. For how is it possible, this is what they didn't understand, that plenty and famine should coexist? Either you have fat cows alone or you have lean cows alone. But you can't have them both together. The 7 years of famine cannot be present during the 7 years of surplus. This is where Joseph's brilliance was dazzlingly displayed. When Joseph proceeded to tell Pharaoh how to prepare for the coming famine, what he said was as follows. He was not offering him unwelcome advice on how to run his country. Rather, the advice was part of the dream's interpretation. What does this mean? Joseph understood that the coexistence of the 2 sets of cows contained the solution to the approaching famine. During the years of plenty, Egypt must live with the years of famine as well as though they were already present. Even while enjoying the abundance of the years of plenty, Egypt must experience its imagination that the reality of the famine is upcoming, and each and every day store away food for it. The 7 lean cows ought to be very much present and live in people's mind, and their behavior during the era of the 7 fat cows. You know, in this system was implemented in Egypt, then even during the years of famine, the nation would continue enjoying the abundance of the years of plenty. The 7 fat cows would be very much present and alive even during the era of the 7 lean cows. This is what so impressed Pharaoh as when Joseph interpreted the dream. To begin with, Pharaoh was struck by Joseph's ingenious in counting, for what one detail of the dream that had evaded all the other wise men of Egypt. But what thrilled him even more was Joseph's demonstration of the fact that Pharaoh's dream not only contained a prediction of future events, but also offered, and more importantly, instructions on how one to deal with these events. The dream did not only pretend and create problems, but also offered an important solution. The wisdom of Joseph's presentation to Pharaoh became strictly clear when we reflect upon the spiritual message behind the story. For as we have not noted number of times that the stories of the Torah describe not only physical events that take place over a certain point of history, but also details that are timeless tales occurring continuously within each and every one of us in our human hearts. All of us experience cycles of plenty and cycles of famine. In our lives, there are times when things are growing and things are growing well. We are healthy, successful, and comfortable. And often during such times, we fail to invest the energy and cultivate genuine emotion and intimacy within our lives. It's times like this that we don't acknowledge the greatness and the uniqueness of our spouses, to develop real relationships with friends, and to create a sincere bond with Almighty God. We feel self-sufficient and don't need anybody in our lives. Yet what happens is, when a time of famine arrives, when a serious crisis erupts, God forbid, in our lives, and the one of our nations experience these things happen every once in a while. We see this on our own calendar in our own country. We suddenly feel the need to reach out beyond ourselves and connect with our loved ones and with God. All of a sudden we become spiritual. Yet when a time of famine arrives, when a serious time it is important, we sometimes forget the importance of what it means to be appreciative of the good times. But we don't know how, because when we do not nurture our relationships and our spirituality during the years of plenty, when the years of famine confront us, we lack the tools we so desperately need to survive these types of crises. This is the essence of Joseph's wisdom. You must never detach the years of plenty from the years of famine. When you experience plenty, do not let it blind your vision and make us think that it's not important. What is truly important in life, we have to remember during the times of plenty. The priorities you cultivate during your good times should be of all the kind that you sustain during even the more troubling and hurtful times. If you are investing your time and energy in things that will prove to fulfill you and to bring you joy and happiness and success, then those things you should remember even in times when you have those challenges before you. Sometimes you want to re-examine your present choices. And why wait for the day that you will have to say, if I would have only realized? We're going to take a short break now. When we come back, we got more to the Rabbi's message. You're listening to the Rabbi's message, and we'll be back right after these words. The world glows a little bit brighter as giant outdoor menorahs light up the night sky. Wherever you travel, you'll see them at the White House, in Red Square, lighting up the foot of the Eiffel Tower. There are thousands of them, shedding light from Australia to the frontiers of Siberia, and of course throughout our beautiful state. These menorahs have been placed by the Chabad Lubavitch organization to help publicize the message of Chanukah, the miraculous triumph of religious freedom over oppression. Still, the main celebration of Chanukah remains a family affair. So in the evening of each of the 8 days of Chanukah, gather your family and light the menorah, adding an additional flame each night. If you would like to find out more about the Chanukah holiday, please visit us online at www.chaiseattle.com. This message has been brought to you by Rabbi Elazar Bogomilsky of Shmooze Radio, wishing you and your family a happy Chanukah. Well, welcome back to the Rabbi's Message. So when we think about what we spoke about up to this point, the uniqueness of what this Torah portion teaches us, the power of Joseph's dream, the wisdom of Joseph, the ability to overcome and to see something that most people in the world couldn't comprehend. That how do you have plenty in the time of famine? And how do you have famine in the time of plenty? How do those two extremes coexist? But the lesson that Joseph taught us, and why King Pharaoh was so impressed that literally made him the second in command over an entire kingdom, the most powerful kingdom at that period of time. What Pharaoh realized that in the words of Joseph, an interpretation that Joseph delivered was not only, of course, good advice, but was a message for life. That a person has to always look out for the future. Our rabbis tell us, Ezehu chacham haroa es hanolad. Who is the wise man, the one that sees the future? Does that mean we're supposed to be all prophets? We're supposed to be people that have visions of the future. How can we commend from a human being that we should all of a sudden become a prophet? Isn't that beyond the normal nature of the universe? What are the rabbis teaching us here? Who is the wise man? And they don't say who is a prophet, they say who's the wise man. And perhaps this is the interpretation to this expression, that when we deal with understanding the uniqueness of life, and when we deal with understanding the moments that we have before us, that are good, and those times that unfortunately are more challenging. And we look back and we say, the energy that I've received from the plentiful time, the understanding, the joy, the celebrations, the times in life when things seemed so simple, the times in life when things were all just stood before us, and it was easy to do. The economy was flourishing. Health was in full tact. It was easy to do these things. Comes the story and the message of Joseph. And Joseph teaches us who is the wise man, one that plans for the future. What does that mean when you say plan for the future or sees the future? When the period of time comes before us and each and every one has those challenging moments. What one should do is not look with sabr and say, gosh, why did God throw me these cards? It's not fair. I can't deal with this. There's no understanding. Wait a second. Think back at those times when you had plenty and utilize those moments that when you don't have, you should appreciate for what you have. Because when you appreciate even when you don't have, once again, that wheel of life, as we call it in Hebrew, the galgelet shel chayim, that wheel of life keeps on revolving and keeps on turning, and once again you'll be on top of your game. And I believe, as this message comes so close to the Hallel of Chanukah, so close to the glory of lights, the festival of lights, when we celebrate each and every day an additional light, I think it's important that we look through the message and the story of Chanukah. Put yourself in that situation 2,000 years ago. During the Hellenist movement, Jews, it was not popular. Culture, it wasn't the right thing. It wasn't the in thing to be a proud Jew. You had to be concealed. Jews were totally consumed in the Hellenistic movement. They were excited about the world around them. They were excited about grabbing, inspiring, reaching things that they sort of unforbidden. Fruit was very tasty. The messages from this week's Torah portion that wait a second. Those moments of famine, those moments of trials and tribulations that we go through, Joseph taught us and gave us the tools and taught the world at large. This interpretation of the dream wasn't a Jewish interpretation. This interpretation was for King Pharaoh, the strongest and most mightiest king in that period of time in history. And King Pharaoh was so impressed because the message hit home by him. He realized the importance of the culmination of plentiful with famine. Having it all and having nothing. Having health and having challenging moments. Having abundance of comfort, as we call it in Hebrew, parnassah, livelihood. And having times when you don't know where the next check will come from. All these concepts of life, these two contrasts that we constantly battle. One says there will be this moment and there will be this moment. Joseph says that both moments come together. Because the appreciation that you have to have when you have to realize that it was never you. It's a gift from God. And when you have that notion, and you have that unique perspective, understanding how everything we have in this world is a gift from the one above, then when those points in life and those moments in life sort of creep upon us, and we say, why? What did I do? We begin to become stronger from those moments that we had plenty. And I believe this is the message of Hanukkah each and every one of us can relate to. How so few people were able to stand up, and thousands of years later we can celebrate this festive holiday of Hanukkah. It's the only reason why we celebrate this holiday is because there are those that believed in this concept of fusing those two contrasts together, making the plentiful and the famine, the trials and tribulations and the joys of life, realizing how each and every one of us has the potential to bring them both together. And I think when a person begins to realize this unique culmination, how we have the power to constantly connect, and we have the power to make these two extreme ideas a reality in our life, I believe that's the most humbling and most joyous celebration internally and externally that a person can witness. Because there isn't a greater joy to the human being when a person begins to feel that they have control of their life. When a person begins to feel that life is empowered by them, not that they're being empowered by life. Because there is no greater joy to the human being than being your own human being, your own boss. That's what separates us from other creatures, and that's what separates us and keeps our head above all, especially in this amazing country that we live, that we're able to practice our religion with freedom, with joy, with celebration. These are all things that are not just words, and we say, wow, these are great words. What does it mean to me? But these are words that have a reality. So I want to wish each and every one of us a tremendous week, a wonderful Shabbat Shalom, and of course a very joyous and celebrated Happy Hanukkah, that remember every night that you kindle your menorah, you are culminating these two differences. Again, you're listening to the Rabbi's Message. This is Rabbi Elazar Bogomilsky. See you same time next week.